This is a very interesting mitzvah.
Which one? We've got a lot in this parsha.
So this week, Parashat Teitzei, like you said, we find a lot of mitzvahs, many small little tiny parshiot filled with different mitzvahs. And in the beginning of Shlishi, we find a very interesting mitzvah when a person builds a new home. And Yitzi, if I tell you you're about to build a new home, this will probably mean that you're about to encounter one of the more exciting occasions in your life, one of the more exciting times in your life where you get to build a new home. And you would think, therefore, when the Torah tells us somebody is building a new home, the Torah will say, make sure you build a home of Torah. Make sure you build a home of values. Make sure you build a home filled with good, chesed, with kindness, with welcoming in guests. So many good things to say about building a new home, right? We have mitzvahs with homes. We have the mitzvah of Mezuza. We have the mitzvah of learning Torah at home. So you would think the Torah would use one of these mitzvahs or one of these ways to describe and command the mitzvah when it comes to building a new home. But actually, when you look in the pasuk, the Torah tells us that when you build a home, you have to make sure that on the roof you put a fence, you put a ma'akeh, a rail, a banister, something like a fence, in order to protect people that go onto the roof, that maybe in the future one of them might end up falling, and then there will be blood shattered in their house that you just built. And you really have to ask about this commandment. Really? This is the most important commandment a person has when they build a new house. This is what they have to think about this fence on the roof, about this ma'akeh. Why is this mitzvah, the mitzvah of ki tivneh bayit chadash, when you build a new house, when you build a new home? But also, like I mentioned, the Parsha is filled with other mitzvahs too. And in this little paragraph, in this little parsha, the mitzvah that's connected to this mitzvah is the mitzvah of kelaim, is the mitzvah of sowing your vineyard with a second kind of seed. So you really have to ask about this too. What is this connected? How is this connected to the mitzvah of building a fence on the roof? So what exactly is the mitzvah of ma'akeh legagecha, of ki tivneh bayit chadash, of building a new home? What is it about? How is it connected to kelaim? What is the Torah actually teaching us over here behind these mitzvahs in the beginning of Shlishi?
That's very interesting, and I agree, that's not what you would expect. But maybe that's what the Torah is telling us, is I know that that's not what you're going to expect. I know that that's not also what you're thinking about while building a new home. And this is why I'm telling you that. Because when you're building a new home, in general, when you're doing something positive, when you're creating, you're focused on creating, you're focused on doing, you're focused on what you have in front of you and growing it and making it. And you know what? This is true about both those mitzvot. Building a house, growing your fields. When someone's doing, they're focused on doing. And the Torah says, yeah, I know that you're building a house and I know that you have all these dreams about what you want to do with that house. But the Torah says, stop. Before you move on, the ability to grow something, the ability to create something starts with creating boundaries, with creating certain rules within which you create, within which you grow. This is true in many things. Someone wants to paint a picture. The first thing they do is they take a piece of paper. And this piece of paper has certain boundaries and they know this is the paper they have to work with, and they start drawing within those lines. And the Torah says it's great what you want to do with your house and all the good things that you want to do. But first of all, you have to make sure that your house doesn't cause the opposite, doesn't end up being something which brings damage to other people. Once you've first taken care of, as we call it sometimes, sur mera ve'aseh tov, right? You have to move away from doing bad and then do good. It's often more fun to focus on aseh tov, but to be able to succeed in that, you have to first make sure that you've done sur mera. But I think there's a deeper level to this. And really, as you mentioned, these two come together and they really don't seem connected. But if we look at both of them, I think there's an even deeper message here. Because what defines both of these is, as first of all, we said, these are both someone trying to create, someone trying to grow and do good and bring something good and positive into the world. But second of all, both these mitzvot are talking about something that's not relevant now. It's going to be relevant. When you put those seeds there, nothing happened yet. But if those seeds grow, as the pasuk says, then, what's going to happen is you're not going to be able to use anything from this field because it's going to be mixed and you're not allowed to touch it. So as you're doing something now, you're just putting seeds. Nothing bad happened yet, but it will. It's looking towards the future. And also with the house. Right now, no one's standing on the roof. I don't need to put a fence there. Yeah, but maybe they will. Maybe someday they they will. First of all, that ability to, even while you're creating and doing good, to be able lirot et hanolad, to see the next step, to think about the future. And I think the Torah is teaching us a deep message here. When creating something, there are two things that will lead to its success. One is its borders, its boundaries. When you create clear boundaries for something, that allows you to build within them. And if you don't have boundaries, what's going to happen? Yipol hanofel mimenu. Someone's going to fall outside of those boundaries. If you want to succeed in building, first create those boundaries. But then there's a second thing. If you want things to flourish, if you want things to actually grow, make sure that within those boundaries, you have order. Everything has its place. Don't just mix everything together. Things often grow when you give them the right place. And we've discussed this many times on the channel. You know, the importance of every person and everything having its own place for it to grow the best way. Sometimes when just saying, let's just do more and more and more, we know often in life, tafasta merubelo tafasta, do everything. When we try to grab everything, we end up with nothing, which is exactly what the pasuk's saying. You're trying to grow also the vineyard and also the other seeds, you're going to end up with nothing at all. You're building this house and that's great, but if you haven't done borders, if you haven't created that fence and someone does fall, everything you've built will be pointless. And I think this is true for many things in Judaism. You know, take Shabbos. Shabbos, we know we have many laws about what you can't do. Don't do this, don't do that, and don't do this. But when we think of Shabbos, we don't usually think of that. We think of the Shabbos experience. We think of the meals, the time together, the family time, the spiritual time. But the Torah teaches us to achieve that Shabbos experience, you need those boundaries. You need the lotase. You need all those rules. They create those borders within which Shabbos can actually flourish and grow. So I think this is why, as you're saying, the Torah starts with Ki tivneh bayit chadash. It gets you all excited. And we know the Torah talks about the importance of someone building a home. We talk about someone who goes to a war and is sent home because he just built a home. The Torah recognizes that excitement. And especially at that moment, the Torah is teaching us, if you start on the right foot, if you set things up correctly, if you create those boundaries and set things up right, then you will actually succeed and be able to enjoy and grow things at all levels, physically and spiritually, within this home you're creating.
Very good, very true. Like you're saying, it's all about setting the environment in which we people can grow the best way we can grow, because like you said, we mentioned many times, people, just like produce, like fruit, vegetables, need the right environment, need the right climate in order to grow the best way. And this is what the Torah is teaching us over here. The Torah is telling us that a home, in order to have a good home that can nourish, that can help grow the best way, it needs to have the rules, the boundaries, the borders set in the beginning in order to make sure that things can grow the straight way out of that home. Because in the end of the day, like you were saying, it's not only about creating in general and doing things and building new things in the world in general, but the most important creation a person can create in the world is a human being. Like we know, the first mitzvah in the Torah is actually the purpose of mankind is to get together, is to build a family. There's three partners in a human being. The way to become a partner with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is by creating life, by creating a human being. This is what the purpose of mankind is. This is what our purpose is to create this next generation, to create these new lives, and then make sure that they grow the best way, make sure that they develop the best way, because this is our purpose. This is what we're about the next generation, about creating the environment in which the next generation can be built the best way it can be built. And maybe this is not only the connection to kelaim, to the next mitzvah in the Parsha, but also to the previous mitzvah that we just had in the end of Sheni, the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKen. A lot has been talked about the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKen already from the days of the Mishnah, from the Gemara. It's such an interesting mitzvah, such an interesting concept. But in the base of that mitzvah, in the foundation of that mitzvah, is the idea you can't take the mother with the kids together. And as the Ramban, as the Chinuch, as many of the Rishonim explain, the part of the reasoning behind the mitzvah is to show us the rachmanut, show us the mercy that we should have even to animals, as the connection, the bond between the mother and the children is so strong. The bond between the family is so big. We shouldn't ruin it. We shouldn't hurt it. We can't cause this pain between the mother and the children, because this bond, like we were saying, this frame of a family is something that we can't disrupt, because this is what builds the world. This frame, these borders, not only the technical borders of the house, not only the technical boundaries of the house as a fence, as a rail, as a makeh, but also the essence of the house, the essence of what a family is the parents, the kids together. Shema beni musar avicha ve'al titosh torat imecha. There's a reason Shlomo HaMelech, the smartest man ever to live, in the book of wisdom, starts it off with this concept, with this rule of listen to the Torah of your mother, listen to the Musar of your father, this importance of continuing the way, continuing the tradition, continuing the learning, the purpose from the previous generation within this frame of a family, because this is what makes sure that the next generation will grow the right way, will develop the best way to be what they have to be. Maybe this is the connection between the two, and maybe also this is not only about that connection, but also the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKen itself. Leman yarichun yamecha. The Torah says that if you do so, if you live by this mitzvah, your days will be longer. You'll add life into your days. This is not the only mitzvah where we see this. We see the same thing also in mitzvat kibud av va'em, where one has to respect their parents. Leman yarichun yamecha, because this too is what adds life into your days, because this is what life is about. Because when you honor your parents, when you live by that tradition, when you live within that frame, within those boundaries, within these rules of what a house is, of what a bait is, if your bait chadash is built that way, if you understand the connection, the bonding between the mother and the children, if you understand the concept of honoring your parents, of living life through this frame, through these boundaries, this is what adds life into your days. This is how your days get longer. This is how you add purpose into your life. This is what life is about. And maybe this is what the Torah is trying to teach us here in this mitzvah of makeh for a new house, of building a frame, building a fence, building boundaries for a new house, and why it's so important, like you were saying, because this is what later on helps in the future to make sure that the next generation, to make sure that what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to create within this new home is built and grows and develops the best way it has to be developed.
Yeah, so important, and it's so relevant for today. We've spoken lately about the concept of self-achievement. People are so focused on achieving, on feeling they're achieving. And when you're so focused on achieving, people are always focused on what? On doing more and more and more, but they sometimes miss how things are done. And the Torah is saying, what? Yeah, build a house, great, but how? How should that house be? Where are its boundaries? What are you doing in life? And this is true also for success in everything. In business, you can want to do everything, but if you're all over the place, if things are all mixed together, as the pasuk uses the word mile'ah, mile'ah can mean there's a lot, it's full, and that sounds great. It's full of stuff, but you end up with nothing because it's so full that there's nothing. It's just a mess. Being able to think of what I want to achieve. The biggest challenge in life is being able to focus and say where I don't want to be, where I do want to be, and where I don't want to be, and be able to focus and create those boundaries. Within those boundaries, as you said, there you can have arichut yamim. There things can actually flourish and grow. As you said, as a family, having family as a boundary, not having everything as a mess, those boundaries create the ability to actually reach long and flourishing life. Exactly.
Like you were pointing out in the beginning, these mitzvahs are about the future, just like what actually chinuch is about, education about. It's all about the future. Even in his later days, the person should not leave the way they were taught in their early days. And as we've said many times, each one of us with their family is an educator. We all have this responsibility to educate the next generation. Each individual, each one of us has this within them. But we're out of time, so we'll have to end here. As usual, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to like it on YouTube, comment too, and of course, if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing on YouTube. Help us grow the channel, and of course, share this video around with others. And also, we'll just remind our viewers what we discussed the past couple of years. Last year, we discussed the vows, nedorim. The Torah says specifically that if you don't vow, you don't have a sin. We elaborated about that. Why would one even have a sin if they don't vow? What is even the havamina? What would you have even thought that it would be a sin? We'll link that video. Also, 2 years ago, we discussed the whole idea behind the mitzvahs of a Shavat Aveda. On the one hand, where a person is not allowed to ignore. Yet on the other hand, the mitzvah of matnot aniyim, of leket shecha pe'ah, what the person has to leave in the field for the poor people, where they do have to ignore. The relationship between these two mitzvahs that we also find in this week's Parsha. We link that video too. And shkoyach Yitzi.
Shkoyach Tuvia. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, and Mitzvah Hashem. We'll talk again next week.